Welcome to the Talking Michigan Transportation Podcast. I'm Jeff Cranston. It is May 17th, 2023. Michigan is about to join several states across the country in implementing a ban on the use of handheld phones while driving. The bills made it out of the legislature just last week, and Governor Whitmer plans to sign them soon. This follows passage of similar laws in nearby Ohio in recent months, and data indicates those laws have already made a dent in distracted driving there, something national safety officials said cost more than 3,500 lives in 2021. To talk about the data that illustrates a reduction in handheld phone use since the law passed in Ohio is Ryan McMahon, Senior Vice President for Strategy at Cambridge Mobile Telematics. So again, as promised, I'm with Ryan McMahon, who is a Senior Vice President of Strategy for Cambridge Mobile Telematics. Ryan, thank you for taking time to be here and talk a little bit about your firm and what you do and why you do it.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you for having me, and appreciate the opportunity to represent CMT, or Cambridge Mobile Telematics. We're a technology company that was founded from research at MIT, and our work initially was on measuring road surface conditions through sensors that were put into trunks of taxi cabs. And over time, when more sensors really came onto the marketplace, and when we think about sensors, we're talking about the initial flip phones, the Motorola Razr phones. Those type of initial use cases allowed us to then start to measure more broadly across a number of different points. And today, our technology is used by 21 of the top 25 insurance carriers to measure driving behavior. We measure behavior by assessing risk from looking at sensors like accelerometer, gyroscope, magnetometer, barometer, and we are able to measure how fast a driver is driving, how aggressively they start and stop. And probably most importantly for this conversation, we can assess when a driver is engaged in handheld phone use or interacting with the screen while driving as well. So our technology is used to assess risk, to set insurance prices. We actually are being used today to assess about $4 billion of premium discounts back to consumers today that can demonstrate their safety by enrolling in a telematics program from most leading insurance companies have these programs today. And right now we measure roughly 9 to 10 million drivers each month that are engaged in these programs that are all optional, all opt-in, that these individuals have an option to have their insurance priced from a methodology that is based on their individual risk, not their aggregate risk or not the number of tickets they've gotten in the past.
So I'm glad you held that disclaimer about it being optional, because I know that the discussions of these things trip every civil libertarian trigger and privacy concerns. And you're not doing this necessarily to follow anybody in particular, but can you explain, if they do opt in, is it still publicly available data for the FCC, or is it because they opt in that you're able to gather the data?
So we do not sell data. We do not share data with any other parties. We make technology that our customers, and our customers being in this case the insurance industry, but we also work with organizations like AARP has a safe driving program. We work with companies like ADT that have a crash detection program that can detect a crash in real time and send help to individuals. And in each one of those cases, the technology is created and used right where the consumer is enrolling. So that data is not made available for sale or for share for any other purpose. We don't generate revenue from advertising. And privacy is of the utmost importance to us as an organization. We, unlike a lot of other maybe data organizations, which CMT is not, our revenue is generated from the sale of our technology and being able to use the technology to build elements like the prediction of an individual driver for them to get into a crash. We have the ability to detect that crash in real time and then send emergency help. But the data is never used for any other purpose that the consumer did not opt in for.
So let's talk about what you found, as I mentioned in the introduction, Michigan is poised to become, I guess, what would be the 27th state to have some kind of distracted driving bill, a ban on handheld telephone use. But most recently, Ohio adopted a law very similarly, and already they found like a 9% reduction in distraction, and that's just after 1 month. That seems to, spell good things in the future. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, it's really interesting. We've studied this in a number of states going back to 2018. And over that work, we see a very consistent pattern that has come to fruition where there's a gap between an individual's awareness of the risk of this issue and how commonplace it is. Just today, as we record this conversation, I'm actually in Europe, and just while I'm driving here or riding in the passenger seat, I'm seeing drivers use their phone while driving in a congested city. And these problems, unfortunately, are pervasive to the point where it just becomes part of normal driving for so many people. What's happened is when these laws go into effect, there's conversation about the issue. There's conversation about the level of risk. There's an increased enforcement, increased awareness that this issue is fundamentally detrimental to a number of different safety factors when we come to our ability to get to where we want to go safely. And unfortunately, if you look at what's happened in a road safety trend the last 4 or 5 years, and certainly accelerated in COVID, the amount of distracted driving that we have seen overall is up in some cases 30%. The amount of time that somebody is spending interacting with their phone while driving, in this case, more than 10 miles an hour, is up 30% in some cases. So what has that done overall? Well, we also know that we're facing a record number of road fatalities that have occurred over that same period of time. And these two numbers don't usually get correlated together because there's really no information on distracted driving as a factor into a crash in so many cases. It's just a hard element to detect. So what we've seen is when these laws are passed, it's not only the fact that the law is passed, but it's also the fact that there's more conversation about the issue. There's more media attention to the issue. And in every single case, and especially in the case of Ohio, what we've seen is the first week that law goes into effect, there's a tremendous amount of media attention, and we also see a reduction. That reduction leads directly to less crashes because we know which behaviors lead to crashes because we measure both the behavior of the individual driver and then the outcome that occurs at the same point. So we have the ability to predict the likelihood of a crash or the likelihood that we reduce crashes from that engagement. So what happens in these cases, and what I'm very excited about for Michigan, is we are going to see a reduction in that behavior if it follows the national trend. The only time that has not happened, by the way, is in the case of Massachusetts, which their law went into effect in February, late February, early March 2020. And of course, we're all aware of what happened then when all the media attention was placed on the public health emergency of COVID. So what happened is in Massachusetts, there was actually no change. But in every other state, there's a reduction in behavior. And we've seen this happen each week in Ohio so far, and we'll keep measuring it, and we'll do the same in Michigan.
Yeah, that really does illustrate your point, I guess, about media attention and awareness. If Massachusetts didn't see a similar reduction because it coincided with the beginning of the pandemic. But and talk about this a little bit if you can, and I know this might be outside of CMT's realm because it gets into behavior and psychology. But when you talk about what we saw with the pandemic, the higher speeds make sense to a degree because there were fewer people on the road. So, less traffic, people can drive faster. But how do you explain more distracted driving and people not wearing their seatbelts and some of these other, dangerous behaviors that we saw just really spike?
I can speak a little bit to what we've seen with distracted driving, not with seatbelts, though. So these two elements may or may not be connected. But certainly with phones, more of our life has gone to a digital element. And there are more activities that we do on a daily basis that happen on our phones. There's more availability of technology that's accessible directly through a smartphone. And as a result of that, there's a blend between the time where an individual is doing activities that they are driving and also that are engaged in daily life. And that blend may have accelerated even faster during COVID. And one of the things I want to be clear on here for the audience, Jeff, is we do not measure or detect what individual action somebody is doing on the phone. We can see the sensors, we can see the movement of the accelerometer, of the gyroscope. We can tell if the call is taken via Bluetooth or not. But fundamentally, what an individual is doing with their phone, that is private to them. So we don't know exactly which apps individuals are using or if they're spending more time on other activities. But the fundamental truth that we've seen, and it's quite amazing, is it was almost the same days that lockdowns went into effect, that schools shut down, that we started to see this very big spike in distracted driving minutes per drive hour. And unfortunately, we have not really seen that behavior return back to below pre-COVID levels in any state. So when we think about the importance of enacting laws and then attention to this issue long term, if we look at Ohio, you're looking at a state that is reducing distracted driving minutes per drive hour post the signature of their hands-free law. And that's against the national average that's increasing. So it's almost like the tide is coming in on distracted driving all over the place. And any state that is reducing that behavior rate now is making progress against really what is an epidemic that has no other real signs of slowing down.
No, it's true. All the numbers aren't in for 2022 yet, but anecdotally, the speeds that skyrocketed in 2020 are still out there. People are driving faster. After making some real gains in the years preceding the pandemic and crash deaths in Michigan and other states, those numbers are going in the wrong direction, all the reasons that you cite. I often wonder, just like we seem to find better ways to protect ourselves on the battlefield, better armament, better radar, all kinds of better ways to limit the damage, then we come up with better bombs. And it seems the same way when it comes to technology and driving, that the more we've done to make cars safer with, lane assist and adaptive cruise control and cameras and sensors, we've come up with more ways to distract ourselves as we drive. So until we get to, truly automated vehicles and take the human element out of it, I think the kind of work you're doing is very important. Why do you think it's still a problem in some states? What's the pushback? And I mean, why isn't this a no-brainer to be a nationwide ban on handheld use?
I think it is a no-brainer. I think it's a no-brainer for individuals when they're behind the wheel also to be aware that the level of safety from other drivers that they've come to expect over the course of their own driving is degraded. What that means is the margin for error is less, because if you're distracted and the other driver's distracted, now all of a sudden, you're in an environment that's just simply more dangerous. So I think the first part of this conversation is we have to be aware as drivers that the road simply has more risk than it did before. And one of the things that is apparent in our data is that roughly a third of all the crashes that we detect had the driver's phone in their hand up to a minute prior to the crash. So that is unfortunately just the reality of our driving environment today. And I think individuals in each state has their own components of where they're paying attention to laws and how those laws make sense. I think fundamentally, though, one of the challenges has been, if you go and look at the official data of what behaviors are leading causes of crashes, with causes of severe injuries and fatalities, distracted driving behavior is usually not well represented in that data set, but we know it's just as underreported from the methodologies that are available to individuals to assess this. So fundamentally, if you're in a position to put resources, time, energy, laws towards one behavior or another that's going to save lives, it's going to make roads safer, the core data right now that's available to you as a road safety planner that's published, the official statistics are just undercounting the level of prevalence of this behavior. So I think one of the elements that we have strived to do at CMT is to bring maybe take the curtain a little bit away to unveil the truth behind the issue. And we published a report. We published a report for the last 4 years on distracted driving. And this last version was 60 pages. It was just published maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, and it is quite comprehensive. And our hope is that the more that individuals that are in a position to change the trajectory of road safety understand that this is a major issue, and there's no real we should not feel comforted in the lack of numbers behind the number of distracted driving fatalities, because those numbers are simply just not representative of the true level of risk on the road.
Well, yeah, even before we had cell phones and myriad ways to distract ourselves as we do now, I think distracted driving was probably underreported and undetected, and it's been a factor since human beings started driving, really.
And that's no fault to the individuals that are charged with investigating these crashes or with taking resources and applying it, because there's just we can only report on what we measure, right? And the things that are easy to measure are those that are accessible to us. You can assess speed. You can look at blood alcohol level. You can look at a number of different factors that are measured today. And I think what's interesting about our company is we've almost opened the aperture of risk knowledge a little bit to then now know with a much greater level of certainty of which behaviors are present and prevalent prior to a crash. So the more that technology is used, and the more that it's applied in the insurance industry is a great example of it, because they're putting their financial dollars behind it in a direct way, and they're competing against other insurance companies. So there's this desire to offer the lowest price possible to compete in a market segment, while also being able to ensure that they have enough dollars to pay the claims. So it creates a really interesting environment and a great place to grow our technology, because there's a very big incentive for them to really identify and know what behaviors lead to crashes. And the more that we can open the aperture to understand what elements those are, the better off and the better position they are to then put incentives in place in the form of lower premiums or rewards or contests to reduce those behaviors. And we're seeing that play out in real time.
Yeah, no, it's great if we can base our policy making on facts and data. We will continue the conversation right after a quick break.
You looked. You looked again. Put the phone down and pay attention when you drive, so you arrive alive. Remember, don't drive distracted.
Talk about where you're in Croatia now, doing some work over there. How are other countries doing on this scale? You talked a little bit about what you're seeing as you drive around there, but is anybody ahead of the United States when it comes to dealing with distracted driving and trying to combat, this cause of thousands of deaths a year?
Europe does have lower prevalence of distracted driving overall, and it is interesting to see the difference between various countries. And we are active right now. I believe the number is 21 countries around the globe, with fairly large presence in places like the United Kingdom, in Germany, in Japan, Australia, South Africa. And the prevalence of distracted driving behavior is lower in Europe than the U.S. And I don't have an exact reason for that. The fines are different. The structure is different. They've had laws in place for longer periods of time. But our user base is much larger in the U.S. So it also could be that we're just capturing a different segment of the market in Europe that is not as wide as it is in the U.S. And in the U.S., our customer base is, I would say, a little bit more tenured with their use of the technology, and it is incorporated across a larger number of individuals.
I guess I don't know how insurance rates, compare in those other countries to the U.S. either, and whether insurance companies, you'd think they have the same incentives to look into this sort of thing and fund this kind of research, but I guess I just don't know. Do you have any sense of that?
We could geek out on insurance ecosystems for hours, Jeff, but I'll tell you that What's interesting is Every country is different. The liability systems are different. The methodologies of spreading risk, the methodologies of setting pricing. Every country around the globe is really unique. And in the U.S., it actually is pretty unique too, because each state sets their own policies of how insurance is priced and distributed. And there's a lot of similarities between states, but there's also enough difference to look in and almost look at natural experiments between different markets and how they've reacted. And I think one of the things that's really fascinating in this area is that this connection between insurance and public health and road safety is coming more to light, because there's more knowledge of what causes crashes, because of the fact that there's investment for over a decade, over probably 2 decades in this case, from the insurance industry, putting time and effort to try to understand this element. And before the ability to measure from an individual driver, it was all aggregate. It was looking at aggregate statistics and data of trying to determine what factors caused losses and claims. And really the whole industry has shifted because they now have the ability to understand what an individual's driver's impact on that loss is. And of course, that's the same thing that we look at from a public health standpoint too, from a road safety standpoint. So I am very optimistic about the future, because there's more and more and more work that's being put into this. And I know that the data leads to informed policies and better educational programs, more targeted efforts on enforcement, to build in a better solution that encompasses more than kind of what we knew before. And from a road safety perspective, trying to get somebody to put a seatbelt on is a very different challenge than trying to get an individual to avoid the massive temptation to use their phone while they drive, because it's not just a one-time activity. It's your phone is close to addictive, especially for some people. So anything that we can do to highlight the dangers, number one, to number two, put in more attention to the issue. And then number three, our technology specifically gives an individual feedback. It's like a mirror, a scale, that they get their own personal report card, and they get to see after every trip how safe they were, and they can compare themselves to other individuals. So over time, when people review those trips and they look at their safety, they do reduce the amount of risk behavior that they are engaged in. And we know that leads to less crashes. So we're really optimistic, and it makes it really easy to come into work every day.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right, especially about the awareness, the laws, using data to drive those things and make those decisions, and get people talking, especially kids, because, I know when you talk about how addictive the phone can be. I actually had my daughter, when she was in high school, interview some friends to put together something that's part of a presentation I was making to some of my peers around the country. And her friends were very honest about saying that a message on a billboard or, on a DMS as they drive down the road that says don't text and drive probably isn't going to influence their behavior. So it does take some carrot and stick incentives like you're talking about. And I think that's what can make a dent.
We've seen really good results specifically targeted at newly licensed drivers. One program that I think is worth highlighting is the Oklahoma Challenge. There's a woman named Linda Terrell who was just honored by NHTSA at Lifesavers last year. The Oklahoma Challenge had been an educational program going back years, and they added telematics to this to basically help newly licensed drivers understand their own individual risk as they're going through. And it's a fun competition. People competed against other schools, and they also got prizes as well. And what we saw from this, and this is what we see on a regular basis, is the bottom 25% of drivers, the drivers that are most at risk for crashes, those drivers almost universally improved by 50%. We've seen this we've done competitions in the cities of Boston, San Antonio, LA, and Seattle. And that work has been published by the Federal Highway Administration. It's cited as a success story on the road to zero fatalities. And in that case as well, we see that the drivers that exhibit the most risk are those drivers that have the biggest change. So what happens is individuals, they don't actually understand. There's really no measure of how safe you are as a driver. People, the level of overestimating safety and how good of a driver somebody is is a challenge. It's a big challenge. So we think that by just simply showing drivers where they rank versus other individuals, and then allowing them to see this information directly, and then it being transparent to them so they have the understanding of what elements that they can change that will reduce their risk. And if there's an incentive tied to that as well, it creates a huge value. So right now, the insurance industry is spending billions of dollars directed at road safety, and we know these kind of concepts work. And it especially works in individuals that are the most likely to crash.
Yeah, it's absolutely true about our own perceptions of ourselves as drivers. I mean, that shows up in studies and surveys about automated vehicles, and people thinking that I'm a good driver, but nobody else is, right? So that's what you're getting at, I think. That
the leaderboards are a really interesting concept, and in some cases we've done. The people that drive, think about this, like the last quarter mile or mile to where you live. And if we showed drivers that on that last quarter mile that their distraction is 500% more than anyone else on those roads. Those are roads where their friends and family live, where perhaps their kids are riding their bikes. And we can show them that information, right? And that level of specificity. The ability to put this information in a way that people can understand it is so critically important. This is not a black box. This data is not being siphoned off where somebody doesn't know about it. This data is available to the individual. That individual then can see themselves in a way that they really haven't before. The only real feedback people get, from driving is from law enforcement, from other individuals in other cars with creative hand signals, and the occasional passenger. So this is the one thing that people can control themselves, and this is what we're excited about.
Yeah, no, it's important work, and I'm glad that we're making strides in the right direction. Thank you very much, Ryan, for taking time out of your busy travel schedule to talk about this. Excited about Governor Whitmer signing the bill here and checking back maybe in a few months to see what kind of a difference it's made in Michigan.
We'll publish the data, and we'll make sure that you guys have a look at it. And what I'll tell you is, the week after we published, the prevalence of distracted driving went down again, because that in and itself was able to create more media attention to the issue, which kind of is a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way, because now all of a sudden a law passes, it's great news, we get discussions about it, but then people's behaviors can tend to go back. So it's so much better if we can kind of let everybody know where the impact is and how that's trending, because we know that these behaviors will take or save lives. And our goal is to make the world's roads and drivers safer. And we are so excited to be able to applaud Michigan in your efforts here.
No, that's the goal, obviously, at the Michigan Department of Transportation, the traffic and safety engineers and planners and people who design roads. I mean, safety is obviously the first priority for everything they do, and they take it very personally. So these kinds of things, I think everybody applauds. And you mentioned cyclists earlier, and I can tell you some of the biggest supporters of this were the Michigan League of Bicyclists, who are really excited about having this law on the books. So thanks again, Ryan.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you for your efforts, Jeff, and please let us know how we can help.
I'd like to thank you once more for tuning in to Talking Michigan Transportation. You can find show notes and more on Apple Podcasts or Buzzsprout. I also want to acknowledge the talented people who help make this a reality each week, starting with Randy Debler, who skillfully edits the audio, Jesse Ball, who proofs the content, Courtney Bates, who posts the podcast to various platforms, and Jackie Salinas, who transcribes the audio to make it accessible to all.